until Monday night when he was a very late attendee at the IMS conference dinner. It was great to sit next to him and get to know a bit about him. He's got an interesting background in the whole sector. I think you will find this accreditation scheme that IMCA are working on of great interest. I'm sure it's going to stimulate some more debate and questions and so on, because these things always do. Without further ado, Graeme, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, both in the room and to those online, watching online. I think this is the first presentation I've done that has an audience, a virtual audience, so it's very interesting. Thank you for the opportunity, the introduction, the opportunity to present at today's event. You'll have to excuse me referring to my notes. The presentation today contains quite a lot of detail, and I want to make sure I get the detail across to you and it's right. So without further ado, we shall get cracking now. Although the topic of today's presentation is the IMCA DP Practitioner Accreditation Scheme, I'm a DP person. I can't come here and present to you without briefly looking at DP station keeping event reporting. It's a very important subject for the industry, so I want to just briefly cover the event reporting update from the 2018 statistics that we have, and give you a summary of that, and then I'll move on to the main subject. So without further ado, we'll have a look at the station keeping summary. A busy slide here. So IMCA received 147 event reports in 2018. When I say event, I mean either DP incidents, DP undesired events, or DP observations. So you can see there, we had 24 DP incidents. That's a full-blown loss of position, either drifting or drive off. 82 undesired events. That is events that have led to a failure that's effectively met but not defeated the redundancy concept of the vessel, and then observations, which is useful lessons learning. 147 reports is a significant increase on the previous year, especially given the backdrop of the industry. So it's very good to see that number of events being reported. And we can see from the graph here that on the left that Europe and Africa remain the top contributor to the scheme. We've also seen a healthy improvement in North America, the reporting from North America compared to the previous years were probably flat in 17. We can also see that comparing undesired events in the red to, undesired events, in the blue to incidents in the red, that generally barriers are being effective across the industry, perhaps with the exception this year of, last year, of Asia Pacific. Looking at the causal factors here on the right-hand side of the screen, so we can see that electrical and human factors remain the top two causal factors. And that's been the same for the last number of years. So we find that you'll find that a lot of the effort in terms of the guidance and the DP event bulletins and the work of IMCA DP committee is focusing more on these two areas in recent times. This year we've also seen, last year we've also seen external factors become quite a significant contributor to a failure. And that's quite an interesting, when we looked into that, we found that actually there were a number of cases reported to IMCA about reference system signal jamming around the Middle East area. Reports of naval operations in the area, and that's led to a number of events and incidents being reported to IMCA. So you will have seen, if you're looking at what IMCA has been producing, you will have seen a lot of guidance coming out about reference systems last year, and a lot of information notes and the likes. Electrical, what do we have? Poor design, poor component selection, lack of maintenance, lack of testing. I guess that's maybe reflecting the state of some parts of the industry. Human factors, training, always mentioned, familiarization, specific DP functionality. When I say specific DP functionality, I mean functionality related to a particular mission. So for example, a pipe lay mode and a pipe lay, a DP pipe lay button. Procedure inefficiencies always comes up. They're all causal factors for within the human factors area. If you look at the market segments, break this down into the market segments, we can see that cargo operations, PSVs, remain the highest contributor to station keeping incidents and undesired events, which suggests still that the barriers are less effective in this area. So if there's an area to give some focus, it's probably that area here. So what is IMCA doing? So we're continuing to feed back lessons from these events in the form of updated guidance, quarterly DP station keeping bulletins, case studies, annual station keeping reviews, and so on and so forth. I'm going to direct you to this page here. Has anyone seen this page before on the website? Anyone looked at this page? A few nods? Yeah. Okay, that's reassuring. This page here is a free to access page with about 70 event bulletins reported on it. When I say reported, I mean events that have been sent in to IMCA, have been anonymized by the Secretariat of IMCA. They've then been reviewed by IMCA's DP committee, and from that, a bulletin has been produced with lessons learned and causal factors and so on and so forth. So it's available, it's on the right side of the firewall, it's available to anyone who wishes to choose to look at this, and I would encourage anyone that's involved in DP operations to go and have a look in here. What I would just say finally before I move on to the next topic, I've spent the last 14 months reviewing DP events that are sent into IMCA, and I can't think of a single event that's been sent into IMCA that we haven't already seen in the industry, or that there's a piece of guidance that doesn't already cover. So I think this is a very useful tool, and hopefully you'll use it as time goes on. So enough about DP events. Let's move on to the main topic of the presentation. So DP Practitioner Accreditation Scheme. So to provide some background, in early 2018, the IMCA board gave authorization to establish a work group with the aim of developing a DP Practitioner Accreditation scheme. Work group was formed with those members that you can see here. And the results of the efforts of the work group were subsequently presented to IMCA's Marine Division Management Committee in December last year. At that point, authorization was given to launch the scheme in May this year, and I'll provide some more information about how the launch is going since it launched in 1st of May. So let's get into a little bit about the scheme. So what are the aims of the scheme? Well, they're very much as presented. It's very simple text here. To improve consistency in conduct of DP trials. I guess we've got a lot of AVIs in the room, and some of this might be quite familiar to you in terms of the reason for being an AVI. To improve the consistency in conduct of DP trials and set a recognized level of knowledge for DP subject matter experts. I should point out, this is not a training scheme. This is for people already doing the work and are already heavily involved in the process. So both points there are very much at the root of the need for such a scheme and lead back to constant feedback from IMCA membership about the need for such a scheme. The objectives: to provide assurance that those attending vessels for trials are accredited to a minimum standard. To assure those undertaking DP assurance activity, equally as important, DP assurance activities on either side of the virtual fence are accredited to a minimum standard. OCIMF produced a DP assurance framework, and the scheme, the objective of the scheme is to satisfy the framework, specifically concentrating on qualifications, experience, and competence. And last but not least, to give a framework to allow practitioners to maintain and increase their knowledge base. However, over and above those formal aims and objectives, IMCA has received feedback for years and years from those conducting trials and those on the receiving side, the vessel owners and operators doing the trials. And I just wanted to present a few questions here. I don't have the answers for you, but it perhaps helps to set the scene as to why we've ended up with the accreditation process. The first one here. Sorry. Sure.
So you're just a little bit quiet. If you don't, you can hold it.
Right. So the first question: how can we expect vessel crew setting up, witnessing, and recording the results of tests to have the same competency as an attending surveyor who's doing this day in, day out all the time? How do we verify that the DP system setup is correct? So we always get nice results presented to us, but how do we know that the overall test process is being is correct? How honest do we think a crew are reporting a finding that may render the vessel out of service? We had an experience a few months back where one of our members complained that during incremental DP trials, it took 7 months for an A recommendation, the most significant of recommendations, to find its way back to the vessel owning and operating company. This is from a vessel owner. Many of my DP trials were left undone following the trials window. The attending surveyor just simply said they weren't necessary. So why are they in the program? My client didn't recognize the attending surveyor and request that we did the trials again. My client states that they don't need to do trials, and every 2 years is sufficient. So these are all typical questions that we've received from members looking for some clarification from IMCA. So all this information is really fed into the development of the accreditation scheme. So let's take a bit of a closer look at the scheme in detail. So at the very top of the picture here, the graphic here, we have code of conduct. So the code of conduct provides expectations on professionalism, objectivity, integrity, personal conduct, non-compliance, professional and client relations, and maintaining the accreditation status. A lot of those areas were discussed over the coffee break, interestingly, from the AVI perspective. Moving down, we then have the bubble that says certification and qualifications. So the scheme requires a minimum level of certification and qualifications, and these differ depending on the DP practitioner category that an individual applies for, and I'll come back to the categories on the next slide. IMCA requires evidence of the certification and qualification, and the evidence is verified as part of any application to the scheme. Similarly, with experience and knowledge, the scheme requires a minimum level of experience and knowledge, and again, that differs depending on the category that you wish to apply for. Like certification and qualifications, the evidence of that knowledge and experience is required, and that is also verified as part of any application. Assuming you meet all that criteria, you're then allowed to submit an examination. And the examination consists of an 80-question paper, multiple choice, and that 80 questions are divided into 4 sections. And those 4 sections are covering 8 modules. So the modules are, the first module is the code of conduct itself, to make sure everyone understands the code of conduct. We then look at DP related guidance documents published by IMCA. We then look at control systems, power systems, thruster and thruster control systems. We then focus on DP documentation that you would expect on board the vessel. And then IMCA M190, guidance for developing, conducting DP trials. That's the key document that relates to the accreditation scheme. The last module is specific to the category of application and provides scenario-based questions, and they're all generated through the experience of those in the work group. The format of the exam is multiple choice, as I mentioned already, and the success criteria is such that each section must be passed to achieve the accreditation status. The exams are all in digital format. They're managed directly by IMCA, and they can be undertaken at various locations around the globe, and I'll touch on that a little bit further in the presentation. They are all invigilated to ensure integrity of the process, and the system used by IMCA is such that no 2 exams will ever be the same set of questions. To achieve this, we've established a very large question pool across all the 8 modules, and the intention is that the question pool will be continually refreshed as time goes on. Assuming you get through that stage, we then look at the revalidation process. Once accredited, the scheme requires a process of revalidation, not too dissimilar to the CMIT process. The revalidation process requires that the individual continues to actively undertake their duties, their relevant duties. So, and that accounts for about 80% of the revalidation criteria. The other 20% of the revalidation criteria relates to continuous professional development. There are a large array of different criteria that you can use to satisfy the revalidation process there. Heading back towards the DP practitioner categories now, there are 2 categories in the scheme. The first category, DP trials and assurance practitioner. This is effectively the person going on board the vessel to do the work, or the person reviewing the work of those on the vessel. The second category is the company DP authority. So this is the person managing the process in the vessel owner or operator, or indeed the end client, the oil company or the renewable company. The work group felt that it was very important to have a category for a company DP authority, because it was important that those people doing that job understand and have a set level of knowledge and competency to be able to receive the information that's coming from those that are doing the work offshore on the vessels. It's very important there, not just those undertaking the trials. Like most things in life, there's very little for free these days, and we have some charges for the scheme. The initial accreditation cost is £550. This includes administration of the scheme, technical checking of the applications, which is quite a time-consuming process, the individual exam license, the test centre, the invigilation and production on issuing of the certificate at the end of the process. We then have a charge for revalidation of £125 per year. This cost covers administration, again, technical checking of the revalidation evidence, and producing and issuing the certificate after that step. There are a couple of other costs associated with the scheme. The first one is excess evidence review cycles. So we have produced a lot of guidance to go with the scheme to make it clear what evidence we require and what the form of that evidence should look like. Within the initial cost, the £550, we've allowed for effectively 2 review cycles. So you submit your evidence, we look at it, we go back with questions, you submit your evidence again. If we are in a situation where we're going back and forth and we're not getting anywhere, and the candidate wants to continue with the process, then we have to make another charge. It's simply time and effort. And that charge, £350. If a candidate fails the exam, there is an additional charge of £200, and that is really the cost of administration, another exam license, another test centre, and another invigilation cost there. Regarding failing the exam, the scheme has some very specific rules around examination resets. Effectively, the lower the mark you achieve, the longer you will be prevented from a reset. If you have a close fail, for want of a better expression, then you will more or less be able to reset the exam again. If you do terribly, you might find you can't sit it for a year. If you have 3 failures of the exam, then you will be excluded from the scheme for 5 years. It's quite harsh. The scheme is not intended to be used as a training platform, so we want people to pass. So, in terms of progress to date, so we have a dedicated web page within the IMCA website. It can be found from the homepage of the website there. Applications opened in May the 1st, and I can tell you a bit more about that in a minute. We have 11 exam centres around the world nominated for scheduled exams, and we're publishing exam schedules online. And we also have the ability to do future-led exam dates. So if you have a business where you have 20 people wanting to go through the accreditation process, then there is a potential that we can do that as a non-scheduled event. To give you a look at some of those exam centre locations, you can see here we have many of the hotspots around the world. There are a few others that are not on this list that we're still working to secure at the moment, but you can see on the list there are the usual places, I would say. We have our first set of exams happening next week in Aberdeen and in London. We have 1 day of exams on the 25th and 2 days of exams on the 26th and 27th in London. And on the 1st of July, we're running our exam in Singapore as well. So there are more dates being confirmed every week as the demand starts to increase for the scheme there. Information on the scheme can be found in the dedicated web page. There is everything you wish to find on this page here to allow you to make an informed decision about whether or not to apply there. And there is a scheme handbook there that contains all the information I've presented here. I have a copy with me today, so if you have any specific questions, then you can ask me now or catch me over lunch. In terms of progress to date, so the scheme's been running for now 7 weeks or so. These numbers are a little outdated since I submitted the presentation last week. So we now have over 400 application pack downloads since the 1st of May. So that's quite high, and I really hope they don't all arrive back in IMCA within the next few weeks. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. But anyway, so we can see that there are over 400 packs downloaded, and we're now seeing a steady stream of applications across both categories coming in from both practitioners and vessel owners and operators and oil companies as well. So it's a very encouraging start. It's as good a start as we could have hoped for in the scheme. But that's not really the whole story, because there's one thing having an accreditation process. The other issue we have is ensuring that the guidance that IMCA produces matches the accreditation scheme. So we've been working on a process to update the key guidance document, IMCA M190, which is developing and conducting DP trials, DP annual trials programs. The reason for the update were more than just the accreditation scheme. We had the IMO MSC Circular 1580 was published a couple of years ago, Guidelines for Vessels and Units with DP Systems. That was replacing IMO Circular 645. I mentioned it earlier, OCIMF published their white paper and then framework for DP assurance. And then IMCA's annual seminar. So we had a marine workshop at the seminar focusing on the subject of DP trials. And many of the questions and comments that were created as a result of that workshop were also used, as well as being used to feed into the accreditation scheme, were also used to feed into updating the guidance document. The DP committee of IMCA was tasked with the work of updating the guidance document and taking into consideration all these different factors. That's resulted in a new revision, which will be published in June. The revision is at the very final stages of review. It's been reviewed by our group of DP copy recipients, which is a very wide group of people from around the industry, around the globe, subject matter experts, etc. They've reviewed the document. It's been reviewed by those people in attendance at the IMCA seminar at The Hague and also the IMCA membership. So, it'll be, as I said earlier, it'll be published at the end of June. But what impact does that mean with reference to the accreditation scheme? So first of all, M190 now recommends that those persons developing DP annual trials programs be accredited according to the scheme. Annual DP trials, and this is the process of undertaking DP trials in one block. M190 now recommends that anyone involved in the conducting and witnessing should also be accredited. Incremental tests. So this is the process of undertaking DP trials over a longer period of time, for example, a few months. And again, M190 states that the persons on board witnessing the tests and recording the results be sufficiently removed from day-to-day operations and that they be accredited. So there are many, many other changes being made to M190, and they're all really aimed at improving the process of producing and witnessing DP annual trials. The objective all along is to improve the credibility that this part of the industry desperately needs, and ultimately work towards the goal of incident-free operations. So in summary, the scheme is here, it's been launched, it's had a successful launch. There's a big marketing campaign happening at the moment, or has been happening for some time. We've had extremely interesting take-up so far in the scheme. It's here to stay. We've had a positive response, as I mentioned earlier. We had an oil company in the US looking to train all their marine advisors internally on the scheme, which is very encouraging. The work group remains in place, and I think this is important, and we can see the benefits from the CMID process. It's very important to maintain the work group to pick up on any issues that arise as we go through further through the launch process, but also to maintain the scheme and keep it relevant as we move forward. And last but not least, IMCA's DP committee is continuing to review and revise the DP suite of guidance to make sure that A, it's in line with the accreditation scheme, and B, it's in line with what's happening in the industry. So that is the end of my presentation. I feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you in a few slides, so I'm happy to take any questions.
The DP incidences, how accurate are the numbers? I know some companies, even ones that I have been employed in, don't always report their DP incidences.
Okay, thanks for the question. It's a very interesting question, actually. From an IMCA's perspective, the number of reports coming in has been generally increasing since IMCA started the reporting process. So we believe we're getting a good, albeit small, cross-section of the industry. What I can tell you is that I've done some analysis on the reports over the last 10, 12 years. And what we can see is that when we look at how many reports, how many events are being reported to IMCA, and we divide that by the number of vessels that are involved, because some vessels report more than once per year. If I do that over the last 12 years, then there's a magic number comes up of 1.3 on average. So that's 1.3 DP events per vessel. If you then multiply that up to the number of DP vessels in the industry, then you're probably looking at a potential of 3,000 DP events worldwide per annum. So as an industry, we're not that great at reporting.
So most probably will be just a comment on that, because the some owners and ship operators, they not reporting to IMCA, neither to reporting themselves as well. If you go on board and you see the incident logbook, it's empty. So that means nothing. When you look in a logbook, in a rough logbook, a few years back, looking at quick, and you see some small incident events happen, but they're not reporting themselves.
If you take part in the scheme, the event reporting scheme, you actually get a certificate from IMCA saying that you have taken part in the scheme and that you assist to promote the scheme. What I would say is that from a vessel chartering point of view, if I were chartering a DP vessel that had never had a DP incident, I would be incredibly concerned about that vessel. I would rather charter one that had some experience and you could see evidence of the lessons being learned, for sure. Yeah.
What do you think the chances are with the new automation of the new DP systems that the companies would be required to report incidences automatically from the machine through their internet to IMCA directly?
Okay, it's maybe a slightly flippant answer to your question, but unfortunately, these machines are often the reason for the events in the first place. So, so there's perhaps a conflict of interest there, but the idea is certainly very, very good. Yeah.
I have a question online from Paul. When will it become mandatory for those witnessing DP trials become DP practitioner accredited?
So the word that IMCA is using is recommended. It's recommended that IMCA members follow the accreditation process. However, what we can see from other similar schemes is that these things tend not to take very long to be included in contracts. So although IMCA recommends, you might find that the end charterer states in a contract that those people conducting must be accredited. But as far as IMCA is concerned, it's something that's recommended. You can see that with the CMID scheme as well.
We're getting into the next presentation time, so perhaps just one or two more questions, please.
Lovely approach here. Are the DP committee in contact with Ajax? Because a lot of class societies having various demands for approvals in respect of LSA, FFE, UTM, underwater surveys, in order also to verify that these persons going on board are truly accredited to conduct the annual FMEA trails. Are you in contact with IAC societies as well?
So some of those in the work group were part of groups that were part of the IACS authority. We haven't specifically been in contact with IACS directly about this, but what I can say is that classification society consultants are very welcome to be part of the scheme if they meet the criteria. In some locations around the world, it's maybe more commonplace, but generally it's not very common for classification society surveyors directly to undertake annual DP trials. So
Maybe you misunderstood the question.
Yep.
Because it's like third parties conducting FFE. LSA, UTM, underwater survey, they are accredited by class societies
Yeah.
in order to conduct these, where the DP annual FMEA.
yeah, so the fundamental problem with the subject of DP is that the classification societies rules tend to be a minimum requirement, whereas IMCA's guidance tends to set the bar at a far higher level. So it's difficult to ask someone that's setting the bar down here to comment on something that's further up the level there. So. Okay.
Yeah, actually, it's more or less the same question. Is the MTS, the Marine Technology Society, is he joining this idea of DP practitioners? The American IMCA, as I call it always.
Yeah, I think if you were over in Victoria and you said American IMCA, you might get your head chopped off. So MTS, interestingly enough, if I flick back to the slide that showed the members of the work group, we can see that there are a number of individuals there who are also heavily involved in MTS there. MTS have created a competency framework, we know that, and that competency framework is really designed for, as far as we can interpret, it's really designed for businesses that are working in this area that perhaps don't have a competency framework already. So, and it gives the potential opportunity to adopt some of those standards that the MTS documents quote. But MTS are not an accreditation body, so they were, yeah. But I can't say many members have already shown interest and actually applied for the scheme. So it's an individual organisation, whereas IMCA is a company membership organisation.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to add to your list.